Ava Monroe had signed dozens of contracts in her life, million-dollar acquisitions, brand partnerships, silence agreements that kept powerful men protected. That none of them had ever unsettled her the way this one did. Because this contract was not about business, it was about survival, and the final clause was written in bold, as if the lawyer wanted to carve it into her future. No personal involvement with assigned security under any circumstances. A rule so clear it almost felt insulting, as though love were a predictable liability that could be managed with ink and signatures. And Ava had almost laughed when she saw it, because she had built her reputation on control, on discipline, on never letting emotions interfere with strategy. She was the youngest executive director of the Monroe Foundation in New York City, daughter of a late senator whose enemies had not disappeared with his funeral. And ever since the threatening letters started arriving in crisp white envelopes with no return address, her board had insisted on private protection. She had resisted for weeks, until the night someone tried to run her off the Brooklyn Bridge, and that was when control began to feel like an illusion. So she signed the contract without hesitation, not because she feared love, but because she did not believe in it enough to think it could ever threaten her. And that was the morning she met him, the man assigned to guard her life. His name was Daniel Reyes, former Marine, decorated, disciplined, recommended by one of the most elite private security firms in the country. And when he walked into the glass conference room overlooking Manhattan, his presence shifted the air itself. He was not flashy or loud. He did not smile unnecessarily. He carried himself with a calm authority that did not beg for attention, yet demanded respect. Tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in a tailored black suit that fit like armor rather than fashion. His eyes were steady and observant, scanning exits, windows, reflections, and polished surfaces, calculating risks before anyone else even noticed them. Ava extended her hand in greeting out of habit, and he shook it firmly but briefly, professional, distant, as if even a second too long might violate the invisible line already drawn between them. "I will keep you safe, Miss Monroe," he said in a voice low and controlled, and she nodded with the confidence of someone used to being obeyed. "I expect nothing less, Mr. Reyes." The exchange felt transactional, clinical, exactly how it should be, and yet, as he stepped aside to allow her to exit first, she became unexpectedly aware of how closely he would now orbit her life. Every meeting, every gala, every quiet drive home after midnight, he would be there, a shadow trained to anticipate danger before it breathed. The first few days passed with mechanical precision. Daniel arrived before she did, inspected her office, reviewed security feeds, coordinated with drivers, and maintained a distance that was respectful but unyielding. He never intruded on conversations, yet always positioned himself strategically near exits, never interrupted her speeches, yet somehow watched every face in the crowd while she spoke. And Ava found herself noticing him in reflections, in mirrored elevators, in the glass walls of conference rooms, a constant presence she had not chosen but could not ignore. She told herself it was purely observational, purely strategic. She evaluated everyone the same way, but there was something different about the way Daniel moved. He did not hover nervously like some guards she had seen at political events. He did not posture for authority. He simply existed with a quiet readiness that felt steady, almost grounding, and that was precisely why it unsettled her, because she was accustomed to controlling rooms with charisma and intellect, not to feeling anchored by someone else's silent strength. One evening, after a charity banquet in Midtown, a protest had formed outside the venue, signs raised, voices sharp, security tense. And while Ava maintained her composure as cameras flashed, Daniel stepped slightly closer, one hand hovering near her back, without touching, guiding her path through the crowd with subtle shifts of his body. He never grabbed her, never assumed, but she felt the barrier he created around her like an invisible shield. And when someone shoved forward aggressively, it was Daniel who intercepted the movement with swift efficiency, redirecting the threat without escalation. And for the first time, she experienced what the contract truly represented, not a limitation, but a boundary drawn to protect both of them from consequences neither could afford. Later that night, in the back of the town car, rain streaked across the windows, city lights blurred into gold and crimson rivers, and silence settled between them, not awkward, but aware. Ava glanced at him through the rearview mirror as he sat in the passenger seat, scanning traffic, jaw set, posture alert. And she wondered what it must be like to live in constant vigilance, to measure danger in glances and gestures, to sacrifice comfort for readiness. "You do not have to watch every second," she said lightly, attempting to pierce the professional barrier, and he replied without turning, "That is exactly what I am paid to do." The words were not cold, but firm, and she leaned back against the leather seat, realizing the rule in the contract was not just legal protection, it was a philosophy he lived by. Distance was discipline, attachment was vulnerability, and vulnerability in his world could be fatal. Days turned into weeks, threats were monitored, investigations continued quietly, and Daniel remained constant, never overstepping, never relaxing. And yet small moments began to slip through the cracks of professionalism. A brief hesitation when she stumbled on the steps of her brownstone, and he steadied her arm, the warmth of his hand firm and immediate, a fraction of a second longer than necessary before he released her. A glance exchanged when thunder shook the windows during a storm, not fear, but recognition, as though both understood the fragility of structures no matter how strong they appeared. Ava told herself these were purely human interactions. Chemistry was a myth invented to excuse weakness, and yet she found herself looking for him in rooms, even when she did not need protection, listening for his footsteps in hallways, aware of his absence when he stepped outside to take a call, and that awareness was the first crack in her certainty. The contract seemed simple, no personal involvement, but emotions were not clauses that could be enforced with signatures. They were currents that formed quietly beneath controlled surfaces, and neither of them realized that the true test of that contract was not going to come from board members or lawyers or even anonymous threats. It was going to come from a night when danger would move too fast for caution, and the line between duty and desire would blur beyond recognition. And for the first time in Ava Monroe's meticulously structured life, the greatest risk would not be to her safety, but to her heart. The following week began like any other, with scheduled meetings, security briefings, and carefully planned appearances. Yet an undercurrent of tension lingered beneath routine, as if the city itself sensed that something was shifting, and Ava tried to dismiss it as stress, but she noticed Daniel's posture had grown even more alert, his eyes scanning longer, his conversations with the security firm quieter and more coded, and when she finally asked if something had changed, he paused for half a second before answering that threats had increased online, anonymous accounts escalating from words to detailed observations of her movements, information that suggested someone had been watching closely, someone patient, someone calculating. And that was when the contract's bold clause echoed louder in her mind, because personal involvement was dangerous enough, but emotional distraction in the face of real danger could be catastrophic. Still, she refused to let fear dictate her expression in public, so that evening she attended a fundraising dinner in a historic Upper East Side mansion where chandeliers glittered above marble floors and powerful donors spoke in confident tones about progress and legacy. While outside the gates, protesters gathered once more, and Daniel remained exactly 3 steps behind her, close enough to intervene, far enough to remain professional. Yet every time applause erupted, his gaze did not soften. Every time laughter filled the room, he continued mapping exits, calculating angles, measuring distances between bodies, and Ava found herself both protected and isolated by the precision of his focus. Later, as the event concluded and guests filtered toward their cars, a sudden blackout swept through the block, lights vanishing in an instant, plunging the mansion and street into darkness broken only by startled murmurs and the distant hum of generators struggling to activate. And in that suspended second before chaos could form, she felt Daniel's hand close firmly around her wrist, not gently, not casually, but decisively, pulling her toward a side corridor he likely identified hours earlier. "Stay close," he instructed, voice low but urgent, and she did not argue, did not question, because the shift in his tone erased any illusion of routine. Footsteps echoed behind them, rapid and uneven, a shadow moving against darker shadows, and Daniel positioned himself between her and the sound with fluid efficiency, guiding her through a service exit into the narrow alley where emergency lights flickered red against brick walls. A figure emerged at the far end, hooded, advancing with intent rather than confusion, and in that moment, the theoretical dangers discussed in boardrooms became terrifyingly tangible. Daniel stepped forward, shielding her fully, issuing a man to stop that carried the unescapable authority of someone trained for combat. The attacker hesitated, then lunged, and everything happened in fragments of motion. Daniel intercepting the attack, grappling with controlled force, disarming swiftly without lethal escalation. The attacker restrained against the pavement until additional security arrived, and Ava stood frozen, heart racing, not from fragility, but from the realization of how close threat had come, how quickly control could dissolve. And when police lights illuminated the alley, she saw Daniel's jaw tighten, not from injury, but from restrained emotion, as if anger at the risks she faced was something he refused to let surface. Once inside the secured vehicle, she finally spoke. "Are you hurt?" And he shook his head. "Minimal impact," he replied, though a faint scrape marked his knuckles, and without thinking, she reached for his hand, examining the cut with instinctive concern. The contact brief yet charged with something neither contract nor discipline could neutralize. He gently withdrew after a second, reminding both of them of the invisible boundary they were sworn to maintain. "This is exactly why distance matters," he said quietly, "because attachment clouds judgment." And she met his gaze steadily,